Your remark further. Good afternoon, Senator Sampson.
Good afternoon, Madam President. I want to start by thanking my colleagues for their hour-long discussion about the bill that is before us. I think it was very informative to kind of put a lot of the facts on the table about what we're actually debating here. And as was mentioned, this bill actually has a number of sections. I think there are 11 sections in total, and I may touch on several of them, but the focus of my remarks is really going to be on sections 4 and 6, which have to do with the changes to the aforementioned Trust Act. I knew this bill was coming over the weekend, so I spent a lot of my weekend preparing and doing research and contemplating exactly how I would approach this debate. And I never really came up with a decision, frankly, because it's a difficult issue to tackle. It's a huge issue that spans not just our municipal governments and how they are being required to deal with this situation, but also our state government, obviously. And ultimately, it's a federal issue to start with. And I guess maybe that's the place to start, really, is that we're here discussing this policy because of a failure of the federal government over decades to actually address immigration in a way that solves all problems. And I say that without any malice because I don't know that I can blame them for solving a problem which I don't know is completely solvable. The fact of the matter is that some people would have our immigration policy look different than it does today, and others wouldn't. And over time, that's certainly been true. And what's happening is you're having various jurisdictions, including the state of Connecticut, reacting to the federal immigration policy and the circumstances that exist in the world with regard to immigration, trying to make their own policy to react to it. Now, personally, I object to the state of Connecticut interfering or intervening in a situation where I don't think it belongs. I would say that that would be my first objection to the Trust Act policy to begin with, which is that, frankly, we elect people. We send them to Washington. We elect 2 U.S. senators and 5 congressmen, and we send them to Washington to make policy, to adjust and modify policy over time if necessary, and that includes immigration policy. And I think it was already determined by my 2 colleagues in both parties without any disagreement that the federal government has supremacy on the subject of immigration policy. How we react to it, again, I think is the discussion. But the federal government has that authority because immigration is something that affects all 50 states and certainly our place as a country and not just a state on the global stage. And as such, I think it's appropriate for the federal government to make these policies. I know a lot of people who fit into the various categories of individuals we're going to discuss today, citizens clearly, but also immigrants to the United States and also undocumented or illegal immigrants to the United States. I know a great many of folks in all those categories and have talked to them about all of these issues over the course of many years, in fact, probably before I was ever serving in the legislature. And it's funny, I was talking to Senator Fazio before we came out here about how our intelligence peaks probably around age 25 or so, and I'm a bit past that. But hopefully our wisdom grows in life, and at some point, maybe your wisdom is enough to outweigh your slowly declining intelligence. But at any rate, I put a lot of thought into this subject, and I try and do this as respectfully as I possibly can. Certainly, at some point in this debate, I'm going to make some points which will be characterized as kind of red meat or vitriolic, because I do think this is a terrible policy that I think has resulted in negative consequences for many, many people. In fact, it's cost lives, and that cannot go unmentioned in a debate on this topic. But I'm also very sympathetic to people trying to get to this country. It's the greatest country on earth, obviously. Who wouldn't want to get to the United States and live here? I love this country personally and brag about it constantly. We just celebrated a Memorial Day in my towns and across the country, and I'm sure my colleagues also marched in parades, and we celebrated our great country, and we mourned the loss of the people that helped us preserve our freedoms along the way. But we did that with love, and we did that love for them, with love for them, and for love for our great country and the benefits that we have for being citizens thereof. And we get to enjoy the fruits of America. Very few people are born in this country without opportunity, without the ability to at least live a fairly decent life, with a criminal justice system that is certainly imperfect but gets it right a lot more than they do, say, in Cuba or someplace like that. So our country is great, and I could go on all night about that. But the point is that people are certainly going to want to get here, and who can blame them? The thing is that we set up a process on a federal level to come to this great country, and it is a lawful legal process, and it takes time. I'm engaged to a beautiful and lovely woman who comes from the country of Taiwan, but she came to the United States through the lawful process, and she recently became a United States citizen. I also know people that have come to this country unlawfully. For a long time, I was well acquainted with a friend who lives in Boston to this day, who is not a lawful immigrant to this country, and she is one of the most amazing people I have ever encountered in my life. She came here effectively as a assistant, or I don't know how to actually describe her role, but she took care of a family and the elderly people in a family for very wealthy people that came to this country. And at some point, something changed, and she lost her employment, and she lost her ability to, live in a safe and certain place. And she struggled. She had a young daughter, and her daughter's now, I think, probably around 12 or 13 years old. But she lived a very difficult life trying to survive as an undocumented person in the United States, when I think it was much more difficult than it is even today. And I'm thinking about engaging in her story a little bit, but I don't think that's really necessary to this argument. I'll just point out that she's a very impressive person, and her circumstances did not define her in any way, shape, or form. Had she been born as a U.S. citizen, I think she could have become anything that she ever chose to be in this world, because she's just that remarkable as an intelligent and capable person. The problem is that I think that's what's lost in this conversation, which is that we are, by policies like the Trust Act, trying to encourage people to break our legal immigration policies and to come to this country not through the legal process. And what frustrates me personally is the notion that somehow the people that advocate for these policies, that try and stand up and say that they're defending the undocumented population, are acting as if they're doing them a favor. And I don't think they are. It is no favor to help someone get into this country or to stay here unlawfully. It's not. If you're here illegally, you are not afforded the same rights as a citizen. You do not get to live the same life as a citizen. You are not lawfully allowed to work. You are going to spend a lot of your time worrying about the consequences of your actions. You'll have to have special concern over policy being passed at the state legislature. You'll have to have special concern over who is elected to the presidency or who the majority is in Congress, all because there's decisions being made that affect your ability to even survive and persist as a resident of these United States. I don't think that's doing anyone a favor. I would much rather have a mechanism that allows people to come to this country lawfully and to go through the process to become citizens and to be able to enjoy all of the benefits of being a citizen of these great United States, the same as all of us. To me, that's the best solution. And as I mentioned from the outset, doesn't happen because our federal government hasn't gotten around to it, or maybe because the current status quo benefits certain people. Maybe there's farmers on the West Coast that like the situation the way it is. Who knows? There's certain businesses that take advantage of cheap, undocumented labor. Again, I don't know the circumstances that lead to the fact that Congress has refused to act to make suitable changes, but I do know that they're not making those changes. And what I don't want to see is the state of Connecticut engaging in that behavior. First, we don't have any role to play. We can't actually change anything. We don't have the power to make federal policy to allow people to come to our state and become lawful citizens. We can't do that. The only policies that this legislature can come up with is things like this, like the Trust Act, which you might call it a Band-Aid, but it's not even that. Because frankly, it's a mess. Because it doesn't treat people based on their own individual merit. In fact, the result of the Trust Act over time has been to treat people that are otherwise lawful people whose only crime is entering the country unlawfully versus people that are actual criminals who commit crimes and harm people. And that distinction is lost. In my view, it's also an incredibly bad message to send to people that if you come to Connecticut, we're going to ignore our country's laws in certain circumstances. What kind of message is that to send? Many people that come here from other countries are coming here to escape that kind of corruption where laws are not applied equally, where they're not treated fairly, where you have to bribe people just to survive, even if you're not even breaking a crime, or breaking a law, rather. And yet, we're imposing this as law in Connecticut. But it's not law. Part of the conversation that my colleagues had was about a civil detainer versus a judicial warrant. And frankly, that's all semantics. That's all it is. A judicial warrant is a legal process that says that the federal government is demanding that the state turn over a person through the court process. And a civil detainer is nothing more than a federal law enforcement agent asking to take someone into custody. And you can argue about a lot of things, due process and various things, and I'm a firm believer in due process. But the fact of the matter is, if you're in the country unlawfully, forget the Trust Act, the federal immigration authority exists as the law enforcement agent in charge of that. And if they're here attempting to apprehend someone breaking that law, they have the right to take them into custody, the same as the cops would have the right to take me into custody if I robbed the bank down the street. The idea that they're not afforded due process is just not true. And to suggest that those things matter in such a significant way, that, oh, we'll honor a judicial warrant, but we're not going to honor the request from the legal authority, because that's who ICE is in this case. They are the legal authority. We are not the legal authority in that case. We do not have jurisdiction. That's the whole point of the Supremacy Clause of the Constitution. I guess the bottom line about my opening remarks here is that we're not staying in our lane. We should respect the fact that we have the right to make a lot of policy in the state of Connecticut, and we should concentrate on doing the best that we can at that. And so far, we're almost done with the session. There's just a little over a week to go, and we still have not tackled the most important things to the people back home. People back home are asking me about why things cost so much. Why are groceries so expensive? Why haven't you guys done anything about the public benefits charge? Why haven't you fixed my electric rates? And yet, we're talking about how we're making changes to a policy that does nothing but interfere with already established federal immigration law. Honestly, it's a waste of time. We should simply encourage our federal delegation to act in the best interest of the state of Connecticut. And we should stay in our lane, in my view. I also think that some of these problems might be solved by us fixing our problems right here in Connecticut. I have no doubt that people across the spectrum in our state would be better served by us spending time tackling the problems that we actually have jurisdiction over than the ones that we don't. There was some discussion earlier about how this policy has evolved. Back in 2013, I think that the original Trust Act passed unanimously in both chambers. I could be wrong about that, but if not, it was very close to unanimously, and I voted for it. I voted for it because when I was in the House at the time, somebody came to me and said, hey, Rob, we have this problem. We need to solve this issue. What we want to do is we want to make sure that undocumented people, particularly in our big cities, they are not afraid of communicating with law enforcement, especially if there's a case where there's a real criminal, a bad guy that's in their same building or down the hall or something they know about. And I bought that. I believed it. I said, yeah, okay, that makes sense. We want to build that trust between the undocumented but otherwise law-abiding person and law enforcement so that we can crack down on the actual criminals. And I thought that was a good idea. I voted for it. I said, sure. And like everybody else, I voted for it. Shortly after that, I remember having a conversation with a couple of New Haven police officers. And we were talking about another policy that I had been very interested in, which was about cracking down on the trafficking of firearms in the wake of the Sandy Hook tragedy. Because for me, every year this legislature likes to take up gun control as part of its long list of priorities. And for me, the priority when it comes to guns is always the same thing, which is get illegal guns out of the hands of criminals. Forget all the other nonsense that we do, telling people how many bullets they can have in their magazine or what particular style or brand or color firearm they can have, which is just ridiculous. Doesn't do anything. What we should do is crack down on crime and criminals. But I was talking to them about that, and I just happened to ask them, what's this story with the Trust Act? Do you guys really have this problem? And they told me no. That's ridiculous. We don't care whether someone's undocumented or not. We never have. We don't ask. Not our job. You know why? Because they stay in their lane. They prosecute the laws that are on the books for Connecticut. In this case, the city of New Haven. They practice their job properly. And they don't care if someone calls up and says, hey, by the way, there's a real bad, gang member down the hall, or there's some crazy stuff going on. They don't care. They're not showing up there and saying, oh, where's your immigration papers, lady? We're going to lock you up if you don't. They don't do that. So in my view, I feel like back in 2013, I was sold a bill of goods. That was put in front of me dishonestly. Because I'll tell you what's happened since, which is that I think that by passing the Trust Act in the state of Connecticut, we did advertise to the entire world that this is, in fact, a sanctuary state, so I'll answer that question. I'll go a little further and say, like I did in 2019, that Connecticut is actually a super sanctuary state, and I'll justify that in a moment. But the issue is that we advertise to the world that in Connecticut, if you're undocumented, come here. Come here, because you'll be protected. In fact, we had already passed a law that says that we will grant you a driver's license. We had other policies to provide in-state tuition for school and across the board. And today we're offering more and more things, including Husky healthcare for undocumented folks. An invitation, frankly, to come to the state of Connecticut, to choose us. Big flashing neon sign, if you're undocumented, you are welcome in Connecticut. So that means we are indeed a sanctuary state. And the problem with that is that is a drain on our state's economy. And again, I know there are people that will stand up and tell me that undocumented people pay taxes, and sure, I know they do. They pay sales tax like everyone else does, but they're not paying all the same taxes as everyone else. They're not legally supposed to work, so if they're not legally working, then they're either working under the table or, in many cases, receiving benefits, because the state of Connecticut has made it quite clear that we're going to offer a lot of benefits to undocumented folks, no questions asked. All of this is costing the taxpayers of the state of Connecticut. It's also one of the reasons why I mentioned earlier, why do groceries cost so much? Why does everything cost so much? It's because there is a constant drain on our economy. I'm not putting it all on undocumented immigrants by any stretch. I'm not blaming that small population of people for that. I'm just saying it's a contributing factor. But the whole idea is that there was a policy decision made by the majority in 2013 that we would be the welcome home for undocumented people in the United States. And every effort has been made ever since to encourage them to come here. In 2019, the most inexplicable thing happened, which is that in the original Trust Act in 2013, there were provisions in the law that said, look, if you're a real bad criminal and you've committed a lot of crimes, you're a known gang member, you're on the terror watch list, the local police consider you a threat to public safety, you've been convicted of a felony, things like that, we would still communicate with the federal immigration authorities. Thank heavens. At least that was some provisions that were in the original law. In 2019, the majority brought us back into this chamber and to the House to pass a law in 2019 expanding the Trust Act at that point. And the change that they made was to carve all that out, to effectively say that we are not only going to protect all the people that we protected before from federal immigration authorities, but now we're going to protect the criminals too. And I stood here in this same exact spot, I think it was probably sometime in May of 2019, probably. Who knows, it might even be the anniversary. And discussed that bill at great length and questioned over and over why we would go through the process of taking this existing statute and opening it up. The whole argument being that we want to build trust between undocumented but otherwise law-abiding people and law enforcement, and instead you're making a law that invites criminals to come and protect them too. What a slap in the face to the otherwise law-abiding undocumented people that live in our state. That we said we want to build trust with you so you can report the criminal down the hall, and then to come back in 2019 and pass a law that says we're going to protect the criminal down the hall too. Fast forward to today, and 2025 is about changing the law again. And you know what it's in here in this bill? Well, a good part of it is buyer's remorse, because I think what happened is between 2019 and 2025, some folks in the majority scratched their head and said, you know what, maybe we shouldn't have opened up the Trust Act protections to people that have really bad criminal records or intent. So part of the bill that is before us is actually good, because what it's doing is closing some of those loopholes. It's actually going back and saying, hey, maybe we should not offer the Trust Act protection to a certain population of people. So I want to thank the majority for putting that in this bill. And if that was all that we were voting on today, I'd be voting yes. It's not enough for me. Frankly, I'd like to repeal the whole thing because I think it is wrong, and I think that it causes more problems than it solves. It also is prohibiting the federal government from making actual good policy on a federal level, because now we are getting all of these 50 states worth of their individual way of handling the federal immigration policy. I want to just talk about some of these individual items really quick. And this is a little difficult because it's somewhat confusing to break down what's protected, what's not protected. But it looks to me like if you look at the bill, what they've done is they've gone ahead and reversed themselves on what happened in 2019 and began to include Class C felonies that were at that time precluded from the law. And thank heavens, because some of those crimes that were pulled out in 2019, we're going to protect you too. Manslaughter second with a firearm, strangulation, sexual assault in the second and third, sexual assault third with a firearm, burglary the second with a firearm, possession of child porn, commercial exploitation of a minor. These are things that the majority said in 2019, we are going to protect criminal aliens that have this on their record. I stood here and said no. But frankly, I don't have the final say. Risk of injury to a minor, enticing a minor, violation of conditions of release, criminal violation of a protective order. These things are being added back in today, and I say thank you to the majority for doing that. The problem is that there's a whole lot more crimes that they didn't include. And it makes me shake my head. Why are we including those and not the rest of them? And why are we protecting criminals at all? Why go through this? Why not go back, if you're going to have a trust act, why not go back and put it back the way it was, that you're only going to protect otherwise lawful undocumented people? But they're not doing that. They're still going to protect criminals. So they have criminals listed here. They have failed to include illegal sale, delivery, or transfer of pistols, revolvers, false statement or information in connection with the sale or transfer of a firearm, alteration of firearm identification marks, serial numbers, or names. These are the same folks that I think are ready, willing, and able to make gun crimes a target. Not if they're committed by someone who's undocumented, apparently. Manslaughter 2, manslaughter second with a motor vehicle, assault in the second, assault second with a firearm, stealing a firearm, criminal possession of a firearm, criminal possession of a pistol or revolver, contamination of water supply or food supply for terrorist purposes, damage to public transportation property for terrorist purposes, abuse 1. Those are just some of them. There's more. Strangulation in the second, unlawful restraint, stalking, criminal use of a firearm, possession of a firearm on school grounds. All of those are still going to be in the Trust Act if this bill passes. All of those things. So before anybody gets down on anyone who's voting against this bill, please understand that if we actually were going to remove all of the criminal offenses that you could still safely fall under the Trust Act for, a lot of us might have voted for the bill. But this is just too little too late. And I understand the buyer's remorse because it was a terrible decision to make back in 2019 to vote to carve out all those criminals. But if you're going to fix it all the way. Senator Kissel brought up the other main aspect of the changes to the Trust Act. And this is the part that is just inexplicable to me. It's like, I get it. You made a mistake in 2019. Let's come back and let's try and fix some of it. Let's carve out some of these crimes. But the other thing that they're doing is they're creating this situation where now an undocumented person, I was going to say presumably a criminal, but I don't want to say that without due process, can sue a town. You know what happens when you sue a town? If you win, that is. If you lose, that's a different story. But if you win, the taxpayers pay for it. And I can just tell you that the people that live in my town, I don't think they want to be responsible for having to pay out the damages for something like this. I think our property taxes are already high enough, frankly. So to create this situation is kind of shocking to me. The two senators, as I mentioned, they went over this in some detail, although I have a few things I want to say that were not addressed. The bill would allow for declaratory relief, which we already established is maybe the court declares something. The question I have about this is, what are they going to declare? Isn't the court, when faced with one of these lawsuits, going to have to make a decision immediately about who's got supremacy over immigration policy? I mean, that's like, I think, an open door for that to happen the very first time this happens. And do we really want that to be the mechanism by which we determine what is the proper policy for the state of Connecticut? Injunctive relief to stop what's happening. The attorney's fees and costs, which is just inexplicable since we don't use that unless we really want to be punitive. If you're hanging around here long enough, you'll see the occasional bill that comes through here where somebody's like, let's just tack on attorney fees and costs. That's where we're trying to stick it to someone, where we're like, oh yeah, this is something so bad that we're going to add that on too. Is this really the kind of thing that's so bad that you have a town that might accidentally interfere with someone about their immigration status? that the taxpayers in that town will ultimately have to pay whatever the damages are, plus attorney's fees and costs? I notice also in the language in the bill, and I may have a question here actually for the proponent, if I can find this, section 6. I notice in the last sentence, it says, an action under this subsection shall be privileged with respect to assignment for trial. Through you, Madam President, can I just get an answer on what that means? Through you.
Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, first I'm trying to get to it. So I think what we're trying to get at is, given, and I know that Senator Sampson might see this differently, but given the import of what we're talking about, that this matter be put forward in a manner where we would get to it in what some of us would think of as a timely fashion. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'm not a lawyer. I don't even attempt to play one on TV because I could never pull it off. But the fact of the matter is, I do know a little something about the law from reading so many bills over the years. And my understanding of this notion of an action being privileged means that it would be given a preference. It would be made a priority over other actions. Is that correct through you, Madam President? Does that mean an action that is brought under this section might be allowed to go ahead of other more long-standing actions through you?
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. Through you, sorry if I wasn't clear in what I said, but yes, it would be considered before some other matters. Through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. So this, I just want to make sure I get this right. This would mean that an undocumented person bringing a claim against the town would have more rights to have their case heard by the court before a citizen who's brought a case against the town. Am I correct about that through you?
Thank you, Senator Winfield.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm not going to get into the discussion about more rights. I think the bill lays as it does. There are other ways in which privilege might apply, but specifically to this bill, it does apply. And so in the case of one bringing a case here, that case would be privileged. That is what I can say to that through you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and I thank the gentleman for his answer, and I apologize if I made you repeat it a couple of times. I'm just trying to be abundantly clear about this. And again, maybe this isn't seen as such a earth-shattering development, but I think it's very interesting to note that the majority has attempted in this policy to effectively create a situation where an undocumented person's rights would supersede a citizen's rights, at least in the preference in which a lawsuit is heard against a municipality. I'd say that's pretty important. And I disagree with it. So think about like the potential outcome of having a policy like this where you're going to start to impose your will on municipalities. And I can see 100 different circumstances where this could shake out. As was mentioned by Senator Kissel earlier, a lot of deals are pleaded out. A lot of times you'll be charged with one crime, but at the end of the day, the prosecutor charges you with something else. So what happens if the police officer apprehends you and charges you with a crime that is still applicable and not protected under the Trust Act, and then you were pled out, and ultimately the crime that you were charged with is actually protected by the Trust Act? Now, is the municipality in violation there? I don't know. Could they be sued for that? They certainly could be sued. Will there be damages? I don't know. But just think about that for a second. That's just one off the top of my head. I suspect what this will do is, as Senator Kissel aptly pointed out, will create a chilling effect on local law enforcement to engage in these types of matters. They might decline to act altogether, even in a serious public safety situation, due to the potential for personal or municipal liability. I think officers are going to make a point of avoiding federal immigration authorities altogether. What does that do for our public safety? And I'll repeat, as I began this discussion, there are plenty of very fine people whose only crime is entering the country unlawfully. But there's also some pretty bad actors. There's some pretty bad criminals. We hear about the news regularly. We hear about these different gangs. We hear about MS-13. We hear about this one gang affiliation where there was this big dust-up about the guy getting sent back, I think, to El Salvador. I can't even remember the name of that gang. Do you know that gang activity still protected under this version of the Trust Act? They didn't see fit to carve that back out of it. So I ask, rhetorically, does this seem like policy designed to enhance public safety? Or is it more about dismantling our federal immigration enforcement policy? It's very clearly the latter. We are admonished in this chamber not to get into the intent of our colleagues for why they pass legislation, but it's hard not to see what's going on here, which is that this policy has very little to do with being good policy, and it has a lot more to do with being good politics. The alleged purpose of this law is to build trust, to encourage crime reporting. I just illustrated how it's going to actually decrease crime reporting, how it's supposed to protect immigrant families. I don't know that that helps either. If you were just protecting otherwise lawful immigrant families, then maybe you might make a point. But once you start protecting gang members and criminals too, then I think your point's out the window, and I don't think you can do that with a straight face, thankfully. The reality is this is going to prevent police officers from doing their jobs. It's going to allow actual convicted criminals to avoid being deported. Cities are going to fear being sued, and they're going to stop cooperating altogether. And because there are not enough protections for undocumented people, they're going to be preyed upon by other, maybe less honest, undocumented aliens. Do you know that this law that we have in Connecticut, and this will remain unchanged if this bill passes today, we actually have the most extreme sanctuary policy in the whole country, even more than California. That's why I coined that term in 2019, super sanctuary state, because I wanted to point out to everyone that we're not just like everyone else. Our sanctuary state policy is actually way more aggressive. There are, I already mentioned the notion of the supremacy clause of the Constitution, but there's also a law. There's an actual statute passed by Congress. It's U.S. Code 1373, and this was passed in 1996, not 100 years ago, certainly when our immigration problems looked much like they do today. But they passed this bill through Congress in 1996, and I encourage everyone to go back and look who was in office in all the chambers and in the White House. But this bill prohibits state or municipalities from restricting communication of immigration status between local and federal officials. Passed as a federal law. So not just a request, as was mentioned, civil detainer, it's also a federal law that you have got to allow for that communication. That's not as simple as even deep contacting Commissioner Dykes. It's a law. The feds have supremacy. How would we like it if we passed a law and any particular town in Connecticut or Lancaster, Pennsylvania, decides they're not going to follow our law? When we have supremacy in that case, we have an obligation to honor our United States Constitution and the fact that the federal government has the authority to make federal immigration policy. That is the point of the Supremacy Clause. That is the point, frankly, of the oath of office that every person in this chamber took, that we would uphold the Constitution of the United States, and that means the laws that are created under that Constitution. Earlier today, I went online and I wanted to look for internet results for the victims of undocumented aliens. And again, I hate to get into this concept because I am very sympathetic to people trying to get to this country. I just wish that we weren't playing games with them. We had a coherent federal immigration policy that people could follow and come here lawfully and live with the fruits of being an American citizen through an equal and enforced process. That's what I wish. But since we don't have that, and since we have the state of Connecticut and the majority trying to pass these policies to circumvent that federal policy, and even, I think, substantially impact its ability to ever be passed, we end up with bad results. We end up with article after article of the ICE officials in Boston complaining and issuing press releases. I found a whole bunch of press releases issued out of their office complaining that the state of Connecticut is letting criminals out. People that are on their list who are subject to a detainer released from this corrections institution and that corrections institution, back on the street, rather than being turned over by federal law under a civil detainer. There's also countless individuals, maybe that's not fair to say countless, let's just say many individuals who've lost their lives at the hands of people that didn't belong in the country lawfully. My issue is not with people that are here undocumented. My issue is, as it's always been, it's with criminals. But by encouraging a policy that protects criminals, and again, I know I've said it already, this policy doesn't just protect otherwise lawful undocumented people, it protects criminals. You end up with more criminals. That's what happens. It's quite simple. When you create an environment that benefits the criminal element, of course, they're going to flock to your jurisdiction. And ultimately, crimes occur, murders occur, and people lose their lives. I was going to start listing a bunch of names, but I'm not going to do that. Anyone listening to this can easily go on the internet, grab their phone, and start looking up victims of criminal aliens. You will have no trouble finding a long list of tragic circumstances. I was on the Federation of American Immigration Reform website earlier, and they have a series of stories about individuals called Stolen Lives. And it's just short videos that goes through the individuals that we've lost at the hands of terrible criminal activity, and what a tragedy it is. It's extremely moving. I say this only because I want to bring up just the importance of this vote today and this policy. We can do better. We can have an honest debate over the value of the Trust Act as it was originally created back in 2013. I have colleagues. We're back and forth about whether or not it was a good idea. We should maybe go back to 2013 or not. For me, I say no. But I respect people that say yes. 2019 was a tragedy, a mess. And I think even the majority recognizes that today with their effort to pull back some of that. But they're not going far enough. You're only going like part of the way down the road. Get to the destination. Let's actually fix it. Let's stop protecting criminal aliens. Let's also stop using undocumented people as pawns in a political back and forth, a political argument. Because ultimately, I think that's what this is all about. It's all about attempting to show favor and appreciation. Again, I'm trying to be respectful of our rules about intent. But I will tell you that I am tired of simply because I am a white male Republican being referred to as a racist. I'm the farthest thing from that. I judge people on merit, and merit alone. I could care less what you look like or where you came from. If you're a good person, if you've worked hard and you've achieved in your life, if you treat people fairly and honestly, I will respect you and appreciate you. It's just that simple. But politics is a dangerous game, folks, and people get lumped into different categories constantly. And I'm tired of getting lumped into a category I don't deserve to be in. I tried throughout this debate to point out as much factual information as I can about where we are and how we got here. And the best solution, really, is to fix our federal immigration policy, or at least recognize the fact that it can't be fixed, at least not in this circle on this day, and to stay in our lane. And with that, I have a few amendments, Madam President. As I mentioned earlier, there are a number of crimes that are still protected under Connecticut's Trust Act, and I think we should do something to change that. Some of that happens in the bill before us, but I would like us to go just that much farther. So I have an amendment. This one is LCO 9404. I ask the clerk to please call this amendment, and I'd be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 9404, Senate Amendment B.
Senator Sampson, please do summarize.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is a very simple amendment. This would simply do much like the underlying bill does and start putting crimes back into our laws that would not fall under the protection of the Trust Act. One of the ones that was omitted in the underlying bill is burglary. I would like to say that if you've committed burglary in the state of Connecticut, that you should absolutely not fall under the protection of the Trust Act. And I'll just say one further item, which is that think about what a burglary is. A burglary is a home invasion. That is someone going into your home to steal your items. That is a violation of everything sacred in my view. And I find it inexplicable that this item was left out of the underlying bill and was carved out back in 2019. I move adoption of this amendment, Madam President, and I'd ask for a roll call vote. Thank you.
The machine is open. Mr. Clerk.
An immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment B. This is not the bill. This is House Bill number 7259, an act concerning revisions to various statutes concerning criminal justice. This isn't a vote on the amendment. We're voting on Senate Amendment B for House Bill number 7259. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate on Senate Amendment B for House Bill number 7259, an act concerning revisions to various statutes concerning criminal justice. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Senate Amendment B of House Bill 7259. Total number voted 36, total voting yea 12, total voting nay 24, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Yeah, I rise with some regret, as I often do after an amendment fails. It looked like a nearly party line vote, although I'm glad to pick up one of the majority. The issue here is that, as I mentioned, we are discussing a bill that is effectively trying to fix a major error in the past. 2019, the majority chose to pass a bill that would protect a great many criminal illegal aliens by the type of crime. And I believe that the bill that's before us, while it has other parts that I find objectionable, does attempt to resolve that by restoring some of those crimes in the aspect of not being subject to protection under the Trust Act. But home invasion, I mean, if that doesn't rise to the level of concern that we should not be protecting people and preserving their status to live in our state, then I don't know what does. But I'm going to attempt to find out. I have another amendment, Madam President. This one is LCO 9408. Again, I ask the clerk if he can call the amendment, and I'd be given leave of the chamber to summarize.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 9408, Senate Amendment C.
Senator Sampson, please do summarize.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This amendment would take the crime of assault on an elderly, blind, or disabled person in the second degree and remove it from the list of crimes that is protected under the Connecticut Trust Act. It's a very simple vote, folks. If you think that someone who commits the crime of assault on an elderly, blind, or disabled person in the second degree deserves to be protected, I guess you vote no. But if you believe that that person should not get the protection of the Trust Act, you vote yes for this amendment. I move adoption. I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you. We will have a roll call vote. Will you remark further?
Roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment C of House Bill number 7259. Immediate roll call vote in the Senate on Senate Amendment C. This is not the bill. We're voting on the amendment. This is Senate Amendment C for House Bill number 7259. An immediate
Clerk, please give us the tally.
House Bill 7259, Senate Amendment C. Total number voting 36, total voting yea 12, total voting nay 24, absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I rise once again with some disappointment and surprise that my colleagues continue to vote against amendments that I believe are common sense, that go, I think, in direct correlation with the bill's intent, which is to revisit mistakes of the past, to go back and claw back in crimes that should not be protected under the Trust Act, which is essentially a major part of this bill. I just, for the life of me, can't understand why they chose some crimes and not other ones that are equally, in my view, disturbing to be protected by the Trust Act. Earlier, I listed a number of these: stealing a firearm, criminal possession, remember, contamination of a water supply for terrorist purposes, manslaughter with a motor vehicle. I mean, these are serious items that I think should have been included. And a moment ago, we just voted on assaulting a blind, elderly, or disabled person. That apparently does not rise to the level of being removed from the protection of the Trust Act for the majority. I have one final amendment I'm going to offer, Madam President, and let's see if I make the case with this one. This one is LCO 9409, and once again, I ask the clerk to please call this amendment, and I be given leave of the chamber to summarize. Thank you.
Mr. Clerk.
LCO number 9409, Senate Amendment D.
Please do summarize, sir.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This is a very similar amendment to the last one. The last one, if you recall, said assault of a blind, elderly, or disabled person in the second degree. This one is assault of a blind, elderly, or disabled person with a firearm. A much more serious offense, in my view, and one that ought to, no question, rise to the level of being egregious enough that we should not protect this person under the Trust Act. I move adoption. I'd ask for a roll call vote.
Thank you. We will have a roll call vote. Will you remark further on the amendment? Mr. Clerk.
Immediate roll call vote has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on Senate Amendment D, House Bill number 7259. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. This is another vote on the amendment. This is Amendment D, House Bill number 7259. This is a vote on the amendment. This is not the bill. An immediate roll call vote in the Senate. Senate Amendment D of House Bill number 7259. Senate Amendment D of House Bill 7259. Total number voting 36. Total voting yea 12. Total voting nay 24. Absent not voting 0.
Amendment fails. Senator Sampson.
Thank you, Madam President. Once again, a little dismay that the majority has voted down yet another amendment that would have eliminated the Trust Act protections for what I consider to be violent criminals. I mean, what else do you need? Someone who would attack a elderly, disabled, or blind person with a firearm. Where is that line? What is the threshold that would rise to the level that we would no longer protect, in this case, a criminal alien? There's a lot more crimes. We could run through a whole laundry list of amendments, but I don't think there's a point in that. We kind of see the way that it's going. So I'm just going to wrap up my remarks very briefly and say that this bill, it's not about kindness. It's not about compassion. It really ought to be about consequences. When the state shields criminal aliens, and again, I'm talking about actual criminals, not just referring to people as criminals. I'm talking to actual criminals, people convicted of crimes, and instead punishes its own law enforcement. I think it's abandoned justice. Let's restore common sense. Let's follow the Constitution. Let's put public safety first. No police officer should ever have to choose between keeping the public safe and avoiding a lawsuit for the town that they are working in. Especially when it's a lawsuit from somebody who's in a country that they don't even belong in to begin with. It's a very simple question, this bill. Do you believe the state of Connecticut should be proactively protecting criminal aliens? If you believe that that's a policy that the state ought to be engaged in, I suppose you vote yes. But if you believe that the federal government has supremacy on immigration and that we should protect the people in our communities across the state by allowing and assisting our federal law enforcement officials who are simply acting in the best interest of our communities and trying to keep people safe by eliminating criminals from among our communities, then you vote no. Thank you, Madam President.
Clerk, please call the vote.
Immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate. An immediate roll call has been ordered in the Senate. We're voting on House Bill 7259.
7259 as amended. Total number voting 36, total voting yea 25, total voting nay 11, absent not voting 0.
Legislation passes